Deputy Clare Daly.
Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. Minister, just to maybe pick up on some of the points, I think all of us would be very much aware of the problems that have been experienced by members of defined benefit schemes which have gone into a wind-up situation and leaving people essentially pauperised in their retirement. I think the case taken by Waterford Glass workers did us all a favour and has shown up the Irish state to be behind its peers in Europe in terms of standing by our responsibilities to elderly citizens. And obviously what this bill seeks to do is address some of those things, but I would like to agree with my colleagues that I don't think that it sufficiently does that, because as it stands today, existing pensioners who are getting benefits from defined benefit schemes have their rights protected. And in essence, what this bill does allow us for the first time to erode the entitlements of existing pensioners. And I don't think that that is good enough, and I don't think it's acceptable. And I think it's particularly unacceptable at the levels which the Minister has set them at. I mean, the best defined benefit pension scheme paid maybe 50% or 2/3 of the final salary on retirement. The idea that we would be setting a limit or enabling a cut of potentially 10% to those who have a paltry €12,000 in their pension fund, I don't think that is acceptable at all, and I think as an absolute minimum it should be at least 2/3 of the average industrial wage and set somewhere in the region of a minimum of 24,000. On the other hand, I do think that you had an opportunity to use this legislation to hit some of the individuals in our society who have obscene pension pots, and that opportunity was not taken, because the idea of merely taking or allowing a taking of 20% on somebody who has a six-figure pension pot is ridiculous. I would be quite in favour, and will put in some amendments even looking at that to be 50% or more. I don't think anybody needs a post-retirement income of anything like that. So I think that that is remiss. I don't think ordinary pensioners should be made to pay a price for a crisis in pension funds which is not of their creation. I think a lot of this gets to the heart of the way in which we treat old people in Irish society, and it certainly isn't good, and our record isn't good in that regard. If you look at pensions in Ireland, Irish pensions cost us 6% of our GDP. Now you could say, oh, that's loads of money, until you look at a society like Italy, and Italy spends 15% of its GDP on its pensions, and I think there is an understanding and a realisation that older people are generally respected and treated better in a society like Italy, and that is something that we should aspire to. And the problem with our pension scheme, which is perpetuated in this legislation, is that it's relying on the one hand on an inadequate state pension, and then the other, the whole policy is based on subsidising private pension funds which go and speculate on the global capitalist market to make its money. And that is a fallacy, and it doesn't work, and it's been one of the contributors as to why these pension funds have got into difficulty. And we need to stand it on its head and look the other way around. Our pension schemes and the way in which the Irish state funds pensions, subsidises them to the tune of billions. The beneficiaries of that subsidisation are the top 20% of earners, and the type of pension schemes we stand by are those who are wealthy in their employment become even wealthier post-retirement. And I don't think that that is fair. I think it understates the value of the contribution made by carers, by volunteers, by people who engage in back-breaking physical work that maybe didn't attract so much remuneration. Those people too are entitled to live in dignity in their retirement. And I think when we look at the figures, which are very striking, where only 20% of our pensioners don't rely on or don't have the state pension as the major component of their income, it means that most elderly people in Ireland and the pension pots that we have are relatively modest, and I think they should be protected and protected across the board. I think organisations like the ESB, the Irish Aviation Pension Fund as well, are schemes which have between them maybe 30,000 members in them. People had a reasonable expectation that they could have a decent retirement, and I think they're entitled to that. And I think the measures that are being proposed by some of the trustees of those schemes, which would see, for example, deferred pensioners lose 40 to 50% of what they thought they would get on retirement, is simply not acceptable at all. One of the key points that comes out in the Minister, I know it was raised in the Shannon and the Minister might like to address it, is the feeling of disenfranchisement by the pensioner groups and the deferred pensioners also, who don't have a place at the table when problems occur. And we're talking about schemes, obviously, where problems occur. But these people obviously have a clear, defined interest in the schemes, but they don't get any talks at the table in the LRC or whatever. And the importance of adding in this framework a right of audience for the pensioner groups and for deferred pensioner groups is absolutely critical. The slogan they use is "nothing about us without us," and that's a basic democratic demand which I believe should be put in any scenario, and presently they are excluded. In many of these cases, it was a condition of people's employment to join these pension schemes, and I think there is some neck of companies where I work myself, like Aer Lingus, who are sitting on a cash pot of €1 billion at the moment, and who are failing in their responsibilities to loyal members of staff who are currently pensioners, who are particularly active members, and also deferred pensioners. This legislation does not ensure that an organisation like that would be required to stand over the benefits of the pension scheme beneficiaries. It does let them off the hook. It's implied that they would be responsible, but there's no legislation that makes them responsible for making up the deficit, and that isn't good enough. I think that means that we aren't taking into account the OECD guidelines, and we're leaving pensioners pay the price of that, and that's the problem with the legislation as I see it. I think it absolutely needs to be amended. While there are good objectives in it, unfortunately what it is actually doing is taking money out of the pockets of hard-pressed pensioners at the moment in order to pay for a crisis that wasn't of their creation to begin with.